Hi, my name is Pam Potter. I'm past president of the Wild West History Association, and I am a McLaury relative. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today, is what it is like to be a McLaury relative in the whole Tombstone, history thing. My great-grandmother, Sarah Caroline McLaury, was Tom and Frank McLaury, older sister, and she was actually between Frank and Tom, so she was older than Tom McLaury, younger than Frank McLaury. And if anybody out there doesn't know, Tom and Frank McLaury were killed at the gunfight at the OK Corral by Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, Morgan Earp, and Virgil Earp. So I like to say that I learned to hate Wyatt Earp at my father's knee. That's what I learned. That was the whole story when the TV series, Wyatt Earp came out. My dad used to tell me everything that was wrong with it, why it was inaccurate, why Wyatt Earp and his family were the bad guys and my family were the good guys. And as I got older, I started reading books, and of course the first books I read were the ones that supported the philosophy that I grew up with. And as I started reading, I was all gung-ho that, those nasty Earps, they killed my family. My family were innocent ranchers, and they were killed by the Earps and Doc Holliday, and the injustice of it all. And then I started listening to some other people who had different opinions. I started thinking, okay, why are these other people thinking things that are different? And then I started meeting historians, people who I respected. And to go back a little in my background, my degree was in sociology rather than history. So I kind of was interested in society, what made society tick. So that kind of fit in and fed into the whole Tombstone scene, what was going on in Tombstone, the different kind of people who were there, how they interacted with each other, the different levels of society in Tombstone. So I started looking at it from that standpoint. And I started meeting historians who kind of liked Wyatt Earp, and my first impression was, and there was a term that was used back in about 1998, that era, Wyatt worshipers. And when the internet first came out, there were divisions. You had your Wyatt worshipers, and then you had your detractors or the Cowboy supporters. And I really started looking at the information and how to research without bias. So it was really interesting being a McLaury in this field, which was really more leaning toward favoring the Earps and criticizing the Cowboys. And I met a lot of interesting friends and learned to really respect historians like Gary Roberts, Casey T. Fertiller, and many others, and started reading real history, learning about the difference between having a bias one way or the other, and really looking at what the facts were. And of course, we still don't know all the facts. I mean, there's still, some of it is still a little bit speculation. Some of it is very educated guessing. Things like, did Morgan Earp trip over a new water line in the street? Something that people really never knew about or thought about as far as the gunfight. And of course, it got down to who shot first, And some people were into how much lint was in Morgan Earp's pocket. So it became, very fine line in some aspects of it, and some parts of it were more general. And, interviewing, people, or reading about the interviews with people and the court cases, but you still had your people who were pro-cowboy and your people who were anti-Earp. And I think there's really a fine line between how we all feel about the people involved, and my belief is the McLaurys were ranchers in reality. I don't believe they robbed any stagecoaches. Yes, they were hanging out with a nefarious crowd, but it was really interesting trying to discern the facts and separate it from family bias. And I think it's something a lot of people in this field have to deal with, because there's a lot of members of the Wild West History Association who have family members who were either outlaws or lawmen. And that's one of the really neat things about the Wild West History Association, is meeting people who know this stuff and meeting other people. I was on the board with a Holiday relative. I'm on the board with an Earp relative. And we all get along. And, we're not holding any grudges now. And it's actually kind of funny. What's really kind of interesting, I was so ingrained in the anti-Earp thing. When I first met Earp relatives, I was a little standoffish. I had a hard time being friendly to Earp relatives. And I've learned now, I've met some really, really great people who are Earp relatives. Say none of us hold any grudges. And I think a lot of people will find that true in the Wild West History Association. There are a lot of books out there that tout one or the other, and we've learned so much more. There's been so much research in the past, like say 10 years. So much more has come about who shot first, or people are still arguing about it, but more information has come out because of all the research that's taken place, because more and more people are learning about good research, good footnotes, good documentation. Historical fiction has its place in that it gets people interested, but what people really need to learn, and that's where our journal comes in, because it's documented and footnoted, and the journal really doesn't accept anything that isn't. And you can really learn a lot from that. I've kind of learned to accept a little bit of historical fiction. I was very anti-historical fiction for a while. I realized that it does have its place in getting people interested. I read Ernest Haycock, Luke Short, which, unless you're as old as I am, you've never heard of those authors, but they were cowboy authors prior to Louis L'Amour, who wrote cowboy fiction. Some of them were real cowboys. That really got me interested. But then you have to learn the difference between fiction. There's historical fiction, there's creative nonfiction, which is where they put words into people's mouths. And my pet peeve is people who say it's the truth when it's creative nonfiction. But you really learn as you read more and more of this stuff to discern the difference between all of these different kinds of writings and looking for footnotes. For a long time, I will pick up a book about Western history, and the first thing I do is I go to the back. I look at the bibliography, and I look at the authors. And if it's an author I respect, this is a good book. If it's an author that I know is not well respected in the field or has a reputation for not doing good research, then it affects how I feel about that book. So my advice to somebody who's looking for good books is to look at the bibliography, look at the footnotes, see where the footnotes are. One of the main things I learned was looking for primary sources. Secondary sources have their value, but they're somewhat watered down, or they could be from a source that is questionable. So you really have to do your work on primary sources. You have to go to the archives. Nowadays you can do it on the internet. I used to go to the National Archives, read newspaper articles, look at land records, birth certificates. Back in the day you had to write to get all this information. Nowadays you can email. But you still have to get these things from the primary sources rather than relying on another book. And you have to know the author of the book. If you are getting secondary sources, you have to know the author of that book. And there are still people who have very strong opinions about the gunfight at the OK Corral. I know some that are still telling stories where this side is right and this side is wrong, and these are the good guys and these are the bad guys, because of. But I think you have to look at the time where all this took place. Who these people were, they were all human beings. They all had goals. They all had relationships with other people. They were all trying to live in their time. Some of them were more ethical than others. Some of them were swayed by their friends or money, reputation, whatever. But you have to, I think, look at people as individuals and accept them as people. You think about what it would be like to stand in the street, let's say at the gunfight at the OK Corral, being shot at and getting hit, crumple in the street, know you are dying. And I like to kind of give those people a little bit of compassion, whether they're the good guys or whether they're the bad guys. Now, some people, I hate to use the word evil, but there are some people out there who were really bad, and maybe they had, some sort of, maybe they were schizophrenic, maybe they had some sort of mental disabilities. But I like to look at what it must have been like to lay dying in the street and know that that was it. And I really think it gives us a better acceptance of who these people were, whether they ended up standing and limping away or whether they lay dead in the street. That happened a lot. It just seemed like back in that time, life was pretty cheap. And I like to look at it as if life really wasn't that cheap. And maybe I'm putting today's standards a little bit on what happened in the past, which is a problem. People do that. They take today's standards and try to apply it to the past. And you have to be very careful about that. But I think everybody's still human, and that we need to look at people as human beings and with compassion and give them the benefit of at least trying to learn their history. I have met some of my best friends through the Wild West History Association because I've learned a lot from them. I respect them, and we have a really good time. One of the best things is just being able to sit around and talk. You can learn so much just from picking brains, just from talking to people. And then meeting people who are like-minded. And I don't mean like-minded and they think that the same bad guys are your bad guys or your good guys are their good guys. But just meeting people who like to explore Old West history. Some of my best times have been with people from the Wild West History Association. And I think we all just really love the subject matter so much, and we have become such good friends in other ways too, not just good friends within Wild West history, but just really, really good friends. And there's so many authors You see a lot of people from the Wilderness History Association who are talking heads on the History Channel. I've been a talking head on the History Channel, and so many members of WWHA have been, and they write articles outside of WWHA. And if you really want to learn more about anything related to Western history, and some other subjects too, that maybe go beyond WWHA scope, there's some people in the Wild West History Association who've kind of morphed into gangsters. Some are more interested in the Indians. But it's all about history, which is so important because we are kind of getting away from that. Some people are trying to get away from history. We need to get more young people involved and find ways of getting them interested. I've never seen Winona Earp. It's, I guess, kind of a sci-fi thing. I guess it's very popular. Maybe that'll get people interested. There have been some of these almost like comic books about some Western history stuff. Maybe that'll get younger people interested, but we need to find ways to keep this stuff alive. And the Wild West History Association and some of their almost like sister organizations you find out through them that maybe are specific to your particular interest, and you can make new friends through there. We've got thousands of members on our Facebook page, and I'm hoping that this particular YouTube channel we have going on will get more and more people interested and want to know more about what's really being researched these days. You see a little bit every once in a while. There'll be an article in the LA Times, the New York Times, something like that, that will pique somebody's interest. But those kinds of things are few and far between. You've really got to go to the history books, and you've got to talk to the historians. And right now, so many of us grew up on Hopalong Cassidy and Roy Rogers. Hate to say Hugh O'Brien, and Gunsmoke, but those shows aren't really on anymore. So we've got to find ways to get younger people interested in the subject matter and let them research too, because they may have some different ideas, some different skills, some different perspectives that we hadn't thought of, or some different ways of researching. And we're not the be-all end-all. We're not the final answer. These people need to keep researching because there's always something new out there. People are coming up with new information in archives. So you can't say, oh, that's all been found. There's nothing new. There is. People are still finding new photographs, new articles, newspaper things are coming more and more online. People are still delving into archives, driving places, going to archives, writing letters, emailing. There's more information out there. You can talk to any author and they'll tell you they have found something new. And it's very, very exciting. So go out there and be the one who can find something new.